What if I told you that ancient Romans loved to snack on flamingo tongues and fermented fish guts on purpose? Forget the toga parties and elegant statues. Real Roman feasts were less Michelin-starred elegance and more fear factor meets Iron Chef. In a world without refrigerators or basic hygiene standards, Roman food came in all forms, including in inedible forms for today's standards. Let's kick things off with a dish that screams upper-class snacking and medieval pest control at the same time. Stuffed dormice. They were considered a delicacy, especially if you were trying to impress your dinner guests with a little, "Hey, look how rich and eccentric I am," energy. And the Romans didn't just catch these things in the wild, they farmed them. Special clay jars called gliraria were used to keep dormice comfy while force-feeding them nuts and acorns until they were delightfully plump. Basically, a squeakier version of the modern foie gras. Once fattened to perfection, the dormice were dispatched, then stuffed with a gourmet mix of pork, pepper, herbs, and ground pine nuts. Some recipes even called for honey or garum, that legendary Roman fermented fish sauce, which we will revisit later. After stuffing, they were roasted whole, sometimes served on silver trays, and consumed like adorable meatballs with tiny feet. The ancient Roman novel Satyricon describes dormice rolled in honey and poppy seeds, turning them into something halfway between dessert, finger food, and a psychological test. Now, don't confuse this with desperation cuisine. Romans didn't eat dormice because they had nothing else to eat. This was elite banquet food. The dormouse was a status symbol. Serving it was like saying, "I have money, power, and a complete lack of culinary boundaries." It wasn't just about flavor either, though presumably the combination of rich meat, herbs, and sugar-coated rodent was memorable. It was about showmanship. Romans were obsessed with novelty and shock value. If your banquet didn't get at least one guest to raise an eyebrow or question their life choices, was it even a feast? And don't think this was a one-time fad. Dormouse dining stuck around for centuries, so next time you're at a fancy dinner party and someone offers you foie gras or quail eggs, just smile politely and say, "This is lovely, but do you have any stuffed dormouse, preferably glazed with fish sauce?" Now, you might think that serving chicken wings or duck breast at a party is pretty upscale, but in ancient Rome, that would be peasant tier. There, the real deal was serving flamingo tongues. This disgusting Roman dish was just what you imagine it, just the tongue of the flamingo, not the legs, not the wings, because nothing says elite dining like harvesting a half-inch tongue from a bird that already looks pretty weird. Flamingo tongue was a legit Roman delicacy, served up at banquets where the wine flowed like rivers and the egos were even bigger than the marble statues. And while we don't know exactly how it tasted, mercifully modern cuisine has moved on, Roman sources tell us it was considered tender, exotic, and so rare that its very presence at the table screamed that you wanted to make an impression. The process of getting the tongues was, naturally, ridiculous. Imagine trying to catch a flamingo, a bird that's half legs, half attitude, and then somehow extract the one tiny part you're interested in. That's like buying a car just to steal the cup holder. And remember, flamingos weren't exactly local in Rome. These birds had to be imported all the way from North Africa or the Eastern Mediterranean, only to be butchered for their tongues. Now, it's not just that the Romans ate these, it's that they celebrated it. Writers like Pliny the Elder, basically the Yelp reviewer of antiquity, mentioned flamingo tongues as peak culinary decadence, and you'd better believe the chefs got creative. They were sautéed in wine, braised in vinegar, seasoned with herbs, and, you guessed it, probably topped off with a bit of garum because nothing says ruin the vibe like fish sauce on flamingo. Some banquets even served flamingo tongues en masse, like a weird Roman tapas. Picture sitting at a marble table while slaves serve you a silver platter filled with tiny pink tongues. There was also a certain performance art to this dish. Flamingo tongues were theatrical, wasteful, and utterly impractical, which is exactly why the rich loved them. So yes, eating flamingo tongues was disgusting and unnecessary. But in Roman society, that was the whole point. Next up, let's talk about sow's womb, because apparently, when Romans looked at a pregnant pig, they didn't see a farm animal. They saw a 5-star delicacy. and not the kind of delicacy you whisper about on a luxury food tour. No, this was centerpiece material at high-end Roman banquets, the womb of a literal pig. Somewhere between barbecue and biology class, the dish known as ventrum porcinum was hailed as a luxurious treat, served to the kind of guests who wore purple-dyed togas and walked around with bodyguards. It was for the aristocrats who already had a room full of marble statues and wanted to eat something weirder than dormice. The preparation was equal parts horrifying and impressive. First, you needed a sow that had recently given birth, or better yet, was still pregnant. The womb was removed and carefully cleaned, probably by someone who seriously regretted becoming a kitchen slave that day. Then it was boiled, braised, or roasted, often seasoned with herbs, pepper, vinegar, and, brace yourself, garum, because even pig uterus needs a splash of fermented fish juice to really bring out the trauma. But why eat a sow's womb in the first place? Well, aside from the obvious because we're rich and bored, Roman physicians and philosophers actually believed that animal organs had specific health benefits. Eating a womb was thought to enhance fertility, masculinity, and stamina. In fact, the dish wasn't just an obscure footnote in Roman cuisine. Nope. The cookbook of Apicius, Rome's Gordon Ramsay without the accent and the yelling, included several recipes involving sow's womb. One version called for it to be stuffed with peppered sausages, pine nuts, and eggs, then baked until golden and horrifying. Imagine your dinner host slicing into that like it's a holiday roast. Yuck! You know a Roman dish that's missing from most dinner parties today? A giant flightless bird boiled in its own misery and smothered in fermented fish sauce. That's right. Boiled ostrich was the Roman Empire's way of saying, subtlety is for peasants. Now, ostriches are already kind of absurd. 6 feet tall, legs like a bouncer at an underground club, and the running speed of a caffeinated cyclist. But to Romans, this was not an animal to be admired from a distance. No, this was dinner, the ultimate exotic centerpiece for the kind of lavish hosts that wanted to impress senators. And how did they prepare this majestic beast? They boiled it. Not grilled, not roasted on a spit with a sprig of rosemary and a side of dignity. Just toss that oversized bird into a cauldron like you're cooking the world's angriest chicken soup. Of course, it was by no means practical. Ostriches are massive, up to 300 pounds of muscle, feathers, and attitude. You'd need a pot the size of a jacuzzi and a kitchen staff with the upper body strength of Olympic rowers. What really tied this disgusting Roman dish together was the sauce. Romans drenched their ostrich in a rich concoction of pepper, mint, dates, cumin, vinegar, and lots of garum. If that sounds like a bold flavor combination, that's because it was. Imagine the taste. Sweet, sour, fishy, peppery, minty. Like someone spilled a spice rack into a bottle of Gatorade. But here's the kicker. Ostrich wasn't even that common. It was ultra luxury. A flex so outrageous it made flamingo tongues look like potato chips. We know about this thanks to that same Roman cookbook author, Apicius. So while today we worry about overcooking our chicken breasts, the Romans were out here stewing Jurassic poultry in herbaceous fish syrup. But that's Rome, land of conquest, empire, and deeply questionable poultry decisions. Just when you thought Roman feasts couldn't get any weirder, enter the jellyfish. The squishy, boneless ocean blobs that look like transparent nightmares from a deep-sea fever dream. To modern diners, jellyfish are something you swim away from, not served with wine and a side of bread, but to ancient Romans, they were an appetizer. Now, eating jellyfish requires a very specific type of person, the kind who looks at a floating gelatinous sea creature and says, bet that would taste great with some vinegar. The good news is that the Romans were not shy. If it came from the sea and looked vaguely edible, you better believe they had a sauce ready for it. So, how exactly did they prepare this unexpected appetizer? Jellyfish were served with egg yolk, vinegar, and oil, and were sometimes paired with sea urchins. Another disgusting combination, but apparently it kept the elite satisfied. The egg yolk and vinegar combo was likely meant to mask the texture, which is to say, distract you from the fact that you're chewing on something that did not have any texture. No bones, no crunch, just pure slime with a hint of brine. But here's the thing. Romans loved to flaunt their sophistication by eating things no one else dared touch. Jellyfish were exotic, rare, and just the right amount of disgusting to impress a room full of senators and drunk philosophers. It was a statement dish like, yes, I eat jellyfish. What do you eat? Bread. You didn't just serve jellyfish because you liked it. You served it to assert dominance over nature, dinner guests, and possibly your own stomach. And in their defense, jellyfish weren't only gross, they were also believed to have medicinal properties. Some Romans thought they helped with inflammation or skin conditions. Honestly, it probably just made people forget they had problems because they were too busy gagging. So next time you're served something weird, just remember, at least it's not cold jellyfish and egg sauce. Because the Romans, they didn't just eat weird, they committed to it. The next entry on our list is something that you might finally recognize. But brace yourself, because the Roman version is not for the squeamish or anyone who's ever politely asked what's inside a hot dog. Let's talk about the Roman blood sausage. Now, before you gag too hard, it's worth noting that blood sausage isn't some bizarre Roman invention we've left behind. It's still a thing in many places today. The British call it black pudding, the Spanish have morcilla, and in parts of Eastern Europe, it's practically a breakfast staple. But the Romans, they took it to a whole new level. Picture this, a plump sausage casing, stuffed with a mixture of pig's blood, ground meat, barley, onions, nuts, spices, and occasionally, you guessed it, garum, because apparently there was no dish safe from that obsession. And remember, the Romans did not have giant factories like we do to make the process clean and safe. The texture of this Roman dish was somewhere between grainy paste and chewy mystery, but the color was a disgusting, deep, ominous maroon, like the cloak of a senator who's just committed light treason. And we aren't even going to try to describe the taste, but here's the twist. Blood sausage had range. It could be humble survival food or a delicacy dressed up for elite feasts. Even more disturbingly, some Roman authors suggested serving blood sausage as an appetizer. Just imagine rolling up to a party and being handed a slice of still warm congealed blood and barley before you've even had your wine. Doesn't seem that appetizing to me. There's also a strong ritualistic angle to this dish. Blood was considered sacred and powerful in many ancient cultures, and Romans weren't above using food to flaunt their spiritual seriousness, or maybe just their iron stomachs. And let's not forget, this was served in rooms filled with reclining guests in silk togas, discussing philosophy while picking bits of barley and pork blood from their teeth. So, next time you're eating brunch and you see black pudding on the menu, just remember, the Romans walked so your artisanal blood sausage could run. There's perhaps no better way to end this video than by talking about something we have already mentioned a couple of times above, garum, a condiment that was essentially liquid gold for the Roman cuisine. If you've ever opened a jar of anchovies and thought, wow, that smells like Poseidon's gym bag, then congratulations. You've had a taste of what ancient Rome consumed on a daily basis. If ketchup had an older, smellier cousin who lived in a clay jar and hadn't showered since Julius Caesar was born, it would be garum. So what exactly was it? Garum was a fermented fish sauce, and I mean really fermented. Romans took small fish, anchovies, mackerel, sardines, and packed them into vats with sea salt. Then they left the whole thing outside in the sun for weeks, sometimes months. It was like they tried to make perfume and accidentally invented chemical warfare. As the fish slowly decomposed into a sludgy, bubbling brew, the liquid that rose to the top was skimmed off. That, dear viewers, was garum, the premium, grade A, first-press fish funk. Think of it as the olive oil of questionable seafood products. There were even different classes of it, from liquamen, lower quality, to garum sociorum, the elite stuff. Romans poured garum on everything. Meats, vegetables, fruits, desserts. Yes, fruit. It was their version of just add sriracha, except the sriracha has turned against you and now smells like dead dreams. One recipe even calls for milk and garum. That's not cuisine. That's a dare, a crime against both fish and cows. But the Romans were obsessed. Garum was made across the Mediterranean, and jars of the stuff were traded like fine wine. But in a weird way, garum shows how resourceful Roman cooks were. They figured out how to turn leftover fish guts into a culinary cornerstone, exporting it across the empire and making fortunes off something most people today would bury behind a hazmat sign. In conclusion, the ancient Romans were brilliant engineers, master builders, and deeply, profoundly weird when it came to food. Their dishes weren't just about flavor, they were about status and shock value. Eating dormice or sow womb wasn't just gross. It was a flex, a conversation starter, a way to say, look how far removed I am from the peasant class. Thanks for joining us at the most disturbing dinner party in history. Make sure to like and subscribe.